Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Ladies and gentlemen, happy Piccolo Day. Today is May 9th, of course, and I figured in the spirit of the holiday, let's go ahead and take a look at a Dokkan Battle classic in the animation department. Of course, we're taking a look at the big bad boy himself, LR Demon King Piccolo. Obviously, this is quite the old unit, having come out in 2020 March in JP. So, of course, as per usual, when it comes to our animation analysis videos, we always have to look at this with a little bit of a different lens, because obviously this is certainly not a 2023 quality animation. It will be a little bit older, so we have to keep that in mind when taking a look at this animation as well. Want to give a huge thank you to Speedy SSJ for allowing me to use this video for the animation analysis. He's the only person I could find on YouTube who had an upload of all of Demon King Piccolo's animations on YouTube. I don't know why. Nobody else decided to upload them, but thank you, Speedy, for letting me use them for this video. I appreciate, of course, link in the description to the original video. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at them. As per usual, I always like to preface this video with two things. For one, we are going to watch it one time through full, and then we are going to actually take a look at this frame by frame as well. I am by no means a professional when it comes to animations or anything like that. I am not an animator or anything like that, but I look at Dokkan assets all the time, and I'd like to think that I am pretty knowledgeable about the topic of what makes a good animation. Now, obviously, this guy is also not a summonable unit either, right? This is a World Tournament LR. Of course, a transforming LR as well, being the old, I don't really know what else to call him, old Demon King Piccolo, right? Oh, of course, as well, this video does have this Jackie Chun, but we're not going to go over his animation because, I mean, it's literally just like a Kamehameha. We're obviously talking about the boy Piccolo today. So, of course, this guy transforms from old Demon King Piccolo to young Demon King Piccolo here, which is pretty cool, obviously, and I was very excited when this guy came out originally. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at his animations in the frame by frame. First of all, oh, we already have our 1080p. Lovely. Thank you, YouTube. We will take a look at the 12 key super attack first. And of course, because this is taken from the basically like the way that a lot of people did like filming the animations back in the day. It had the like top and bottom thing that's almost like if you're watching this off of a banner, right? Like, you know how you can watch a super attack off of a actual like summonable banner, right? It's kind of like that same thing, so just kind of deal with it. Obviously, this is a video from a couple years ago, so keep that in mind. All right, so of course we have Demon King Piccolo in the beginning. First of all, I do like this little beginning part here. Obviously, this is a very early version of some kind of like tricking your mind into thinking that this is a 3D frame, right? I guess you could kind of consider this rotoscoping, but I feel like it's a little bit less so, right? Obviously, the whole idea of this is that you are looking from behind the enemy at Demon King Piccolo, and then the frame kind of spins around to then take a look from the back of Demon King Piccolo, kind of giving you a impression like the ground is actually rotating, or maybe more like the camera is rotating in the middle or behind these two fighters, which is pretty cool, obviously. There's definitely a lot of Dokkan essays that do that nowadays, so it's interesting to go back and see some earlier versions of it. And honestly, for a 2020 essay, I think it's pretty good. There is some things in here that I definitely surprised me a little bit when looking back at these. But obviously, then we have Piccolo fly forward. It's kind of funny with this little bit of like a black blur sort of effect that they have on him as he appears behind the enemy, but that is definitely a pretty cool way to represent like speed, right? Obviously, with this, right, showing that he's moving so quickly that it's almost like you can't really see him, right, and it kind of envelops him like that with all the anime speed lines. I think that's pretty cool, and I'm sure that that's probably also something that they are referencing from the original source material for this. But yeah, Demon King Piccolo comes in and kicks the enemy up. Obviously, it is basically just, you know, going from pose to pose with these sprites, not only when it comes to these older LRs, right, the 12 key and the 18 key, especially the 12 key of the untransformed super attacks, always kind of gets a little bit less treatment than the transformed one, because that's the one that they obviously always give a little bit more love to. And not to mention, obviously, because of how old these are, right, it is just these quick snappy movements, but I think it works for this, right, and they do still have all of the proper things that I think are needed to represent this animation in motion here. So it's pretty cool, and I do like this shot, actually, him jumping up. The way they animate him kind of flying into frame, right, I think works really well to represent him getting ready to slam the enemy down, right, with a very cool impact frame there. And you actually do see him float past the enemy there, or I guess more like fall past the enemy, right, to then land on the ground before them, which I think is a really cool way to transition it, right? Obviously then landing and kicking the enemy. Very, very nice, kind of flowing between the scenes, right? Because obviously your brain recognizes that this is where he should be. So that's pretty cool. Obviously having him stand there and look down at the enemy as they fall to the ground. I do like that they actually bounce, by the way. That is a pretty cool animation right there. There is a little bit of ghosting there. Again, this is an old animation, so I'm not going to be too critical of it. But it would be cool, honestly. I feel like in this, I would have almost just preferred if they would have just changed the pose real quick, but that's okay. Obviously, the kick, I think, actually looks pretty good, right? The kick has nice snappy movement right there, obviously just going from one to another. I think that looks pretty good, and I love the background here, obviously trying to imply, you know, how hard that he kicked him, and obviously just kind of like the clouds in the background moving. I like that effect a lot, with obviously the enemy slamming against the screen. All right, so we then transition to the 18 key. I gotta say, holy cow, bro. I don't know what they were doing back then, but they were cooking on this one. So this is pretty cool. Obviously, a little bit of an introduction almost. Definitely not akin as much to an introduction animation nowadays, but very cool to start the scene with obviously energy flowing off of Demon King Piccolo. And that looks awesome, if I do say so myself. I think, hold on, water break. Hydrate or dihydrate, baby. They did a great job animating this, if I do say so myself. I think it looks fantastic in the way that the energy flows around Demon King Piccolo. As well, I do like the little anime, like, lines. You know, I think it definitely is a good job emphasizing. They do a lot of white impact frames here, which is kind of interesting. This is also animated pretty well, I will say, for how small this is. I do like all of the yellow effects here, right? I think that does look pretty nice. The way that they move looks very, very good. And then this shot where it's kind of zoomed out a little bit more also looks so good. I love the little bit of movement on his hands as well. I think that looks really, really nice. This whole shot is so good. Like, if you told me that this was a modern day essay for this little section right here, I would believe you, because this is a really, really nice shot, if I do say so myself. We then have the card art appear on the screen, and we then go to a little bit of the older sprites with Piccolo charging energy in his hands. Yeah, they love these white flashes in the super attack. It's kind of interesting. Also kind of funny that he charges it in both hands so that it only ends up in one, right, with the other one flown back. I will say I do quite like the colors of this scene, though, obviously giving it a little bit more of a dynamic look. And I actually did not notice that. That's really cool. Even though it is a pretty simple beam effect with the beam just kind of growing bigger and smaller quickly, I do like on the bottom there, that is really cool that you can actually see sort of like the, I guess, not the reflection, but like the glow, right, from the Kamehameha, or not the Kamehameha effect, holy cow, from the Ki Blast effect, excuse me, right? You can obviously see that on the ground there, which I think is a pretty cool little effect, and something that I don't see as often on modern super attacks, so I think that's kind of cool. You obviously have it fly and hit the enemy, and the explosion is very Dragon Ball-esque in the way that it's stylized. I feel like it is perfectly Dragon Ball, so that is pretty cool to see. And then you have him launch the other blast, which does look pretty cool, and obviously blasting away the enemy. Very simple animation there, but I do like the way that the ki actually does dissipate. I think that that does look pretty cool for sure. Right, obviously having it kind of disappear in his hand like that, and then obviously having little remnants that just sort of disappear. Very, very nice, right? Very cool little end there, and definitely looks pretty good. I guess that would end up being a KO screen, huh? I never really thought about that before, but I assume that that would end up having the KO splattered across it. Okay, so we have the transformation animation. This animation is very simple, but honestly, I always thought that this was pretty cool. So if we go here, right, you can obviously see the Dragon Balls look very nice and are lighting up. The light coming off of them with Demon King Piccolo standing before them. Obviously, the exact scene where he wishes for his youth. This whole explosion of light effect and the lightning coming up, I always thought looked pretty good. It's almost like even King Piccolo is like the background here. This render of Shinron is so gas, bro. Holy! It looks fantastic, if I do say so myself, albeit very simple with him not moving. They do have the light kind of glowing a little bit, though, which is pretty cool. Definitely like the look of that, and the very nice little shot panning down to Demon King Piccolo standing under Shinron there. That is pretty cool, right? And then, of course, basically just his PNG with the little, you know, make me young again, right? With Shinron obviously cutting in there. And very, very cool. They take the more Dragon Ball aesthetic of Shinron, because Shinron looks a little bit more intimidating, a little bit more sharper edges in Z, and he has a lot more rounded features in Dragon Ball. Not that he's not intimidating in Dragon Ball, but I think he's a lot less like, he's a lot less cutesy in Dragon Ball Z. So definitely very cool that they keep true to that here. And obviously Demon King Piccolo doesn't really do a lot in terms of his actual animation. He does glow a little bit here, but this is pretty cool. I always thought that this actually looked really good in terms of him turning young again, right? It's kind of just fading in between, but it is pretty accurate to the anime from what I recall. And I think it does look pretty good, obviously representing the scene well. That was also a nice little bit of animation, having his hand kind of rise up a little bit there. I think that just adds to it, gives that little bit of extra pizzazz that I think this animation needs. So that's pretty cool. And then obviously we pan out to this very, very nice shot of him, of course, getting his youth back with Shinron in the background. Again, you can tell, look at all those rounded edges on Shinron. He almost kind of looks like Chibi in the face a little bit, even though it's not exactly like that. But yeah, very, very simple animation for the transition, for the transformation, right? I think it works well, though. I think definitely nowadays, if this were to be redone, it would have a lot more animation to it, because there was a lot of static shots in here, right, where the characters were just kind of standing still. But I think it still worked for back then, and it's still a pretty nice animation overall, I would say. I still like looking at this one when I run him for whatever specific event that, like, they need his category or something. Pretty cool, if I do say so myself. Alright, so now we move on to the 12-key super attack. We have Piccolo getting ready here. Obviously, the little black lines are a perfect emphasis. I think it would still look good if all these little rocks were the only thing on the screen, but I think that's a good way to kind of emphasize the intensity there. And him jumping looks pretty good as well, with him obviously flying up towards the sky. And very, very nice having the speed line sort of represent how fast he is, right, before actually arriving in the sky. And having this nice little bit of animation at the end kind of is like, you know, him sort of slowing down and coming to a stop, which I quite like. Definitely could have been something that was neglected, and then they just kind of had him go from this to this, which I've seen other Dokkan animations do for sure, but it was nice to give him that little bit of extra pizzazz there. And then you have him fly down. I do like this little bit of pwing, right, that's kind of like his change in position and almost like jumping off that spot in the sky. Definitely very cool. I like that a lot. Him obviously flying downward. I love the black lines there. The actual... that did not mean... I did not mean to make that a perfectly cut Dokkan attack. That was pretty funny with the Cybermen just getting obliterated. Anyway, yeah, so obviously we transition to him flying down too, bringing his hand forward, which I think this looks pretty good, right? Even though it does have that little bit of fade. I think it works well for obviously how quick he's firing the blast. And I do like the way that the blast looks, right? It looks pretty cool. And I like how they almost kind of like spin the effects that are right next to his hand, right? It kind of gives off that effect that they're sort of like, you know, moving around from his hand, which is nice. Obviously, it's not just like one PNG that they're sort of shaking back and forth. The Cyberman gets obliterated, and again, very Dragon Ball-esque explosion effect there, which I quite like. We have him land to his feet, and I do like actually the fade effect here. Again, I believe this one is a little bit more intentional, right, because of the way that they did it there. It's kind of, again, supposed to be representing his speed and how fast he's moving, jumping from the ground up, which is pretty cool, which definitely is emphasized very, very well from when he actually arrives in frame. You can see that there is those little bit of speed lines, right, where they kind of blur him, give him a little bit of motion blur as he hovers over the enemy. And of course, we then get to see the card art once again. And his face, very, very nice and close up. Looks pretty cool, right? Love these anime-esque effects right here, too, where we have the fist pull back. And this animation is actually pretty good, I'm not going to lie, especially for 2020. And especially considering, you know, like the 12-key super attack, like compared to this is almost like as close to a modern animation as you're going to get. Like the actual pull back of the fist and then the execution of it flying forward is pretty well done, I would say. It definitely looks good. Obviously, in full motion, this looks pretty good. Out of context, this just like fist on the screen does look a little bit silly, just kind of like approaching the enemy. But obviously, in full motion, right, it looks good. And it makes sense with obviously his fist flying towards you. And it's sort of like a cartoonish sort of thing when you have a character's fist flying towards you and almost like a first-person POV. This is pretty cool with obviously the punch connecting with the enemy, the screen giving a little bit of shake in the white background. Very, very nice combination there, and I think it definitely gives a lot of emphasis to how hard the punch was. The enemy flying away and then crashing into the ground with that huge crater that looks great, by the way. They definitely did a good job of animating that. Okay, and now we arrive on the final animation, the 18-key super attack, which is actually pretty long. So we have Superman's laser eyes coming with my man, right? The laser eyes definitely look pretty cool. And the way that they actually move here, I like that they have them move a little bit before they pan over to the enemy, all right? Obviously kind of transitioning very well, giving you that idea that he's shooting it out and moving it with his eyes until it actually hits the enemy in that perspective, right? Just a good transition between scenes. We then have the anime-esque lines once again as the enemy flies towards the ground. This is a super great shot of Demon King Piccolo shaking his arm, right? He's like, yes, I'm youthful. Very, very cool with this little blast kind of going around his hand and then forming into it. I was always really impressed with this when it came out. The way that they did this effect, very Dragon Ball-esque, but holy cow, for a 2020 animation, that's super impressive that they were able to get that effect to look that good, right? It kind of distracts you from the fact that when they're moving his arms, right? Look at all the ghosting effects around his arms. But obviously just moving from position to position is fine. You can see it there too. Look how angry he looks. Very, very nice. And then this. Oh my gosh, I forgot about this, right? This effect looks really good with obviously the energy sort of like surging through him. I think that this is probably something that a lot of people kind of miss, right, in terms of this effect being here. But hot dog, they did a good job in making that look just how it looks in the anime. Very, very cool, if I do say so myself. I love as well the kind of implication of the energy flowing through him with the electricity. They did a great job representing that here in Dokkan. Then, of course, we transition to the super attack animation, and then we finally have Piccolo readying up the punch. I will say, this is definitely a bit of a quick transition, going from him, you know, standing there with his arms up to then getting ready to punch, because it's one frame where you have him still standing there like this, and then bam, right, ready to give the punch. I definitely kind of wish that there was a little bit more of a transition there, but other than that, though, I think it's fine. And then obviously the punch itself actually is pretty well executed. There is definitely a very big change in like kind of positioning here, right, going from the punch being pulled back to then obviously almost having it fly forward, right, already, right, without kind of a lot of in between there. But obviously the blast being thrown forward, I think that definitely looks pretty good. And they do a good job of distracting your eyes, right, from it being like this to then having his hand already have thrown it by having this be in the screen, right, kind of in your face, blocking everything, to then obviously having the position change as it's kind of thrown. That's definitely a very smart way to do it, and I think it looks good. I love the energy also kind of coming off of the blast as well. I think that definitely looks pretty good. The explosion effects look pretty cool, and the red explosion also looks great. Holy cow, by the way, can we talk about the fact that they killed it with the lighting as well? And you can actually see the red lighting kind of grow around Piccolo there too, which looks great. And obviously the explosion effect making everything in black and white, which also looks great too. Definitely a very, very good job on my boys' animations. So that is going to do it for Demon King Piccolo's animations. Definitely pretty good, right? I would say for 2020. Obviously, there was a couple of things in there that were definitely a little bit of the older animations that my man was rocking, right? Definitely a little bit more stuff from that era and a couple of eras previous. But of course, not only is this a free-to-play World Tournament LR, they were obviously focusing a lot more on the 18-key and the Transform Supers, which was pretty clear. Although on that 12-key, like I said, that's why I'm saying the 18 keys they also focused on, because the part where he was glowing with the yellow effects looks fantastic, right? I think they definitely did a pretty good job on this unit. Let me know what you think about this guy in the comment section below. It is going to be very interesting to see when this guy eventually gets an EZA, how good he'll be. Hopefully then we can run an even more proper Piccolo team, because I know right now if we're trying to run kind of like the Piccolo squad, right, it's definitely lacking a one final puzzle piece, and I think either a new Demon King Piccolo or this guy getting a EZA, especially since we're now getting LR EZAs and we're getting World Tournament EZAs and stuff like that. We could definitely see this at some point. So maybe he could be the missing piece of the puzzle. That would be pretty cool. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe. I do all kinds of animation analysis when it comes to Dokkan Battle. And I'll see you in the next one. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.